So when the crowd saw that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they themselves got into boats and went to Capernaum looking for Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, you are looking for me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures for eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. For it is on him that God the Father has set his seal." Then they said to him, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." So they said to him, "What sign are you going to give us then, so that we may see it and believe you? What work are you performing? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Then Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." They said to him, "Sir, give us this bread always." Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." This is the gospel of Christ.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Grace to you and peace from God our Creator and the incarnate Word, Jesus Christ. Jesus' words at the close of today's gospel text call us to trust. They ask a confession of faith, drawing us away from the familiar. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. We can smell stupidity when we see it in some comedy show, can't we? And we laugh at it. We know the old routine. Who's on first? Yes. What? No, he's on second. Who? I just told you he's on first. Who? Exactly. We'd like to shout out, who is the person's name? It's foolishness to the extreme. It's silly. Look at the progression of dialogue between Jesus and the crowd in today's gospel text. It is the crowd that follows Jesus after feeding of the thousands, which we heard of last week. They ask questions that do not point to the heart of what they seek. "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus gets to the heart of the matter. "You are looking for me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but for the food that endures." And then the crowd answers in good, concrete terms, "What must we do to perform the works of God?" What's the formula for success, boss? Jesus answers, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." And the crowd, "But how are you going to prove that? What work are you performing? Our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness." And Jesus replies, "It was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." And the crowd says, "Sir, give us this bread always." Doesn't it make you want to shake your head? This year, we won't hear Mark's version of this story, even though we are in this year of Mark and the lectionary cycle. So I'd like to draw in some of what a wise theologian has said in a reflection on Mark chapter 8. It is not the crowd, but rather the disciples who engaged Jesus in conversation about bread after a couple of feeding miracles. Jesus questions them in their ability to recognize God's presence. How many baskets were left after 5,000 were fed? And they answered eagerly, 12. And when 4,000 were fed, 7 baskets were left. And perhaps the saddest moment in the stories is when Jesus says, "You don't get it, do you?" Can you hear where the foolishness has crept in? We, as hearers of the story, are not being intimately intertwined in it as the crowd is, or the disciples. We have a vantage point. When Jesus says, "Do you not yet understand?" we can say, "Oh, this is about God's abundance, and about all that has happened in Jesus' presence and person among those who he meets." And the bread that is Jesus is contrasted to the bread of Pharaoh or Caesar or Herod or whatever system in which we find ourselves. The bread that they offer feeds only for a short time before we desire more. It's not substantial, it does not really fill. The bread of Caesar is the bread of production consumption, having much, having more, never being satisfied. And you know of that bread in our own culture too, where we hear messages that tell us to be not to be satisfied with what we have or with ourselves. And when we hear that prayer that Jesus teaches, that we say when we gather for worship, and we speak the words, "Give us today our daily bread," it's not a matter of stocking our fridges and freezers to the point of overflowing or lining our wallets, but it's about having enough. It's a prayer that all might have not too much, not too little, but enough. And it becomes a statement that's alternative to the way our culture or the way our systems work, isn't it? Because that's not the case. Not everybody has enough. Some of us have much more, and many have much less. And so it becomes an alternative sort of way of living and way of being. Sadly, it's easy for any of us to forget God's abundance when we get preoccupied with other things in life. Preoccupied with things like personal ambitions, material pursuits, getting to know the right people, or getting a hold of the newest gadgets. Why talk about a person's presence and life when it's easier to talk about their flesh and blood? Why step out in faith when we can remain where we are, knowing our surroundings? I received an email message which was sent to a group, and it closed with words like these: "God's peace be with each of you in your lives, hoping that our paths cross, and not knowing how long each of us has." The words that acknowledge things that are not within our grasp. We want to be able to hold firmly to things and concepts, even life. Our desire is to have the kind of control where we know the outcome, where we know what is around the bend. Instead, pursuing only those things which we might know for sure, we end up foolish. But we should not lose heart when we or others do not understand, because we have not understood from the very beginning. Only here and there do we get a glimpse that the world has changed. And it was probably said by one of those disciples that day, but didn't make it into our scriptures, "Let's go back and get some of Herod's bread and some of the Pharisees' bread. Then at least we won't be hungry."